Welcome, Comadres and friends. I'm Dr. Nora de Hoyos Comstock, national and international founder of Las Comadres para las Americas. The leadership team and I are pleased to have you join us for tonight's teleconference as we are celebrating our sweet 16th year. It has been our privilege to support Latino authors throughout these 16 years, and we look forward to many more years to come. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our live Twitter chat at Read Latino Lit. Tonight, please help us welcome authors Cynthia Guardado, Rudy Ruiz, and Karen Valentin. The interviews will begin shortly. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute. We are taping. You can keep your videos on, but we suggest you put yourself on speaker mode. Gallery works as well, but remember, we can see you and movement is distracting to all our viewers. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But first, let's start with our book club's history. Comadre Tess?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tess Tobin, the project manager of the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York at Comadre Maria Ferrer's apartment. After a brief hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to promote their work and bring it to our community bookstores, and to support our Latino writers. We started our teleconferences in October of 2007. This year, we are celebrating our Sweet 16 and are delighted to be sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and Zoom conferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book clubs in your city or time zone. We have clubs in 12 cities. There is sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For more information, go to our website, latinolit.com. So please invite others to join us. Comadre Nora, take it away, please.
Thank you, Tess. And tonight we begin our interviews with author Cynthia Guardado, who is a Salvadoran American poet from Inglewood, California. She received her Master of Fine Arts in Poetry from California State University, Fresno in 2012. She is currently a professor of English at Fullerton College, as well as a managing editor of Livewire, a literary arts journal. Her debut poetry collection, Endeavor, was published in 2017 by World Stage Press, and her work has appeared in Poetry Magazine, Huizache, the Acentos Review, and Voz Alta Journal, and was featured at the anthology Wandering Song, Central America Writing in the United States, Tia Chucha Press in 2017. Cenizas was the winner of the 2016 Peltzer Frost Binational Poetry Prize and a finalist for the 2019 National Poetry Series. Interviewing Cynthia is Comadre Nilda Dipa, Vice President of the Florida Writers Foundation, which promotes literacy in the state of Florida. She was also leader of the Maitland Writers Group, and the author of the award-winning book, Alborada, a poetic memoir across cultures. The enhanced second edition, re-entitled Alborada, Dawn, a cross-cultural memoir and poetry, will launch on May the 3rd. Comadre Nilda, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you, Cynthia, for that beautiful way in which you have shared your family's story in this delicate poetic form. Because those of us whose families recently moved to the United States can find many points of correspondence or similarity with our own experiences. And it's very healing and rewarding to read how you put words to a universal experience while sharing your individual one. Having written a memoir in poetry myself, I can appreciate what it took for you to dig up the painful parts of the story and expose the happy ones to the world. I I know I grew as a poet and as a human being while reading your work. So I wanted to start off with that. in some of your poems, you hint at the reasons why you chose the title Cenizas, in ashes in English. What does the word mean to you?
I think it has two meanings. So El Salvador is a land of volcanoes. So we have 18 volcanoes and counting. So I really thought of the ashes as a part of our landscape. There's volcanic rock everywhere. There's parts of El Salvador that have black sand. So the ashes and the leftover of the aftermath of all of our eruptions are there. But I also thought of the ashes of the war, of when many things were being burned down, and from the aftermath of bombs. And then I also think of the phoenix. So this idea that we can have a rebirth through the ashes of our history, of our trauma, and that I changed the title to the book so many times. And when I finally decided on Cenizas, it felt the most appropriate. It was really going to encapsulate all of the different feelings that are in the book.
Yeah, that's very nice. Was a revolution going on when you were 9 years old?
Well, when I was in El Salvador, yeah, so I was born in 1984. And so the war technically started in 1980, even though obviously it was happening, obviously the uprisings were happening prior to the initial start date, right, of the war. So when I started going to El Salvador, it was 1986. So I was going in and out of El Salvador since I was 2 years old during the war.
So what parts of your Salvadorian culture do you see reflected often in your poetry?
I think, to touch on what I just said of this sort of in and out, there's a long poem in the middle of the book titled Diaspora. And I feel that it, as you said, it speaks to anyone living outside of homeland, anyone who is first generation, second generation, third generation even, and is still rooted to homeland, right? Another place that they are no longer a part of, or they're refugees and have been exiled. So to me, I feel that in-betweenness has always been a part of who I am. And even the questions around it, obviously a question I get asked a lot is, were you born there? And obviously, had I been born there and raised there, my experiences would be different. And so I have immense privilege to have been born here and have been born documented, as so many people in my family are not documented even to this day. But the transnational experiences of my life have rooted me so intensely to El Salvador, in particular Buena Vista, because that is the village that my parents are from. It only has 300 people, and 4 generations of my family have been buried in the same cemetery. So I only have one relative not buried in that cemetery.
Yeah, as a Puerto Rican living in the United States for 45 years, I can deeply relate to what you describe as the loss of being from two places. I love when I read that phrase, it just hit me, because I talk about that in my own book. And I'm grateful that you are speaking very openly about this reality of being in the diaspora. I'm glad you mentioned it. Some of our book club readers have pointed out that this book is sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly about El Salvador politics and the US reception of immigrants. Mm-hmm. So they want to know how you navigate that duality, and I quietly wonder how your experience compares to mine.
Well, first and foremost, I think I navigate that duality with an immense amount of privilege, because I was born here, I've been educated here, I have a higher ed degree, I'm a professor, I'm no longer low income. So I have all of these privileges now that allow me to speak as openly as I want, right, about what is going on, especially right now with the current president, Bukele. So it gives me a certain level of autonomy to be able to speak about what is going on in my experiences. while at the same time, I didn't necessarily grow up with an immense amount of privilege initially, right? Of course, I was always documented. My parents were not when I was a child. But I think that for me, it's really important to honor our history and my family and my ancestors. And the second poem in the book is called The Historian, and it's for my mother, because so often we have to turn to our elders, our ancestors, our family members for the history of our family, because it's not in a book. That's not who they're writing about, right? In El Salvador, especially when you see like history books, most of the books that are being published and sold in like La UCA, the Catholic University in San Salvador, which is like the biggest publisher in the country, are written by outsiders. They're not even written by Salvadorians. They're written by people who were there volunteering during the war, or missionaries, right? Or people who came and were doctors during the war, or nurses during the war, but they're not necessarily people from El Salvador. And that is why I feel like I'm walking into it with such an immense amount of privilege to be able to document and write in the way that I have, as well as being bilingual and being able to do that through my conversations with people in El Salvador, with my family, and here.
It's wonderful that you're able to do that. Some of your poems are in both languages, and people notice that you may begin a thought in English and end with Spanish, or vice versa. And they wonder if the poems wrote it themselves that way, or if it was a conscious effort on your part.
I would say that it was a conscious effort on my part at one point in the writing of this book. One of the things that as I wrote these poems and I edited them, that I started to notice I was doing, and I felt that was inaccurate, was that when I would quote people in my family, I would write them in English. And then I was like, why am I writing them in a language they don't even speak? Why am I writing them in a language that they didn't say these words to me in? And so I started to sort of, move away, I felt, from what I think, like in a white supremacist, Eurocentric education that I experienced here in the United States, move away from what felt like a requirement to only write in English, to not code switch, to not honor the language of my family or the voices of El Salvador. And so some of it is very intentional. And other parts of it is like some words, even if they do exist in English, they only exist in Spanish for me, because they just are what they are to me in Spanish. They have a different meaning in Espanol. They don't ring the same way to me in English. And so a criticism I received when I was editing this book was that like the use of my Spanish was like too haphazard, like it was just really random. And I was like, how I choose to use my Spanish is how I choose to use it. And so, but part of it is that, right? Like I'm rooted to certain words so specifically in Spanish that I don't want to say them in English. I don't want to write them in English because they're a part of like my cultural connection. But there is one poem where it's in 3 parts, and there's one part of the poem that is entirely in Spanish. And that is something that also came through my process of dealing with who the person I am speaking to is a boy in El Salvador that I don't know if he is alive or not, but he is Salvadoreño, and the photograph I saw of him is in 1988. And so I could only write to him in Spanish. What other language could I write to him in? So it's for people who understand it, and it's for people who don't, because in the end, it's really just for Abelito. If he, if I ever find him, if I ever meet him, if I ever find out he's alive, right? It's that poem is for him. And so that's why it's entirely in Spanish.
Yeah. And nowadays it's so easy for people to find translation online, for anything that they're curious about. So I'm glad that you do that. I found in poem analysis that Jack Linebear analyzed your poem Aislado, which was previously titled In Exchange for My Absence. Do you agree with his interpretation that the fish doing circles in a bowl is a metaphor for your father's constrained life? Or is it Linebear's own interpretation?
I think it's about not necessarily constraint. I wouldn't, my intention was more about our mortality. And it's my grandfather in that poem, and my grandfather's own reckoning with his mortality at this age, because he's in his late 80s, mid 80s or so, when I have this experience with him where I'm helping him clean the pila. And now he's 92, he's still alive. But I mean, the poem is really questioning his mortality at a time in his life where he is very much alone. All of his children have migrated. No one is left in El Salvador. They only visit. My grandma died when she was 65, when I was only like 10 or 11 years old. So he's been alone a long time, but part of that loneliness is due to his alcoholism. And so to me, the fish was real. It was really in the pila. It surprised me when I got in, like it was really in there. People think like, I think it's interesting how people will sometimes assume like, oh, it's just metaphor. No, the fish actually lived in the pila and was used to clean the pila. And only until I climbed in, my grandfather was like, oh, watch out for the fish. I was like, whoa, what are you talking about? There's a fish in here. You should have told me before I got inside. But then he really did say, watch out for the fish. It might jump from the bowl. And I couldn't help but think like of suicide, about mortality, about his own depression at this point in his life. And I felt like all of, I wrote about this in a craft shop I just published that's free to anyone. It's called Memories We Never Had, the ongoing process of writing in a post-colonial existence. And I said, some poems just happen to you. And that is how I feel. That poem happened to me and I wrote it down.
So how does it feel to have a critic either discover or misinterpret your work, you know?
I think that that's going to happen just because poems, I mean, I teach creative writing, right? So I'm in the classroom all the time and I'm trying to decipher, what does this poem mean? How does it interact? And I'm doing my best to do my research and understand it. But when it's outside of my culture, there's a capacity that I'm limited in, right? And I feel like Natalie Diaz, who I extremely love, is Indigenous, and there are just things that I don't understand that are happening. While at the same time, I think like if it's coming from a white gaze, I think that often they're inputting their own like ideas about our culture or our people that are not necessarily accurate. So that's also going to happen, and it's a part of being part of the literary world in the United States.
Yeah. And I was curious about something else about the same poem, because in the original poem, Abuelo is telling what will happen to the fish. And in the new version, the narrator, which is you and him, see and quote unquote, see what happened to the fish. And you italicize the word see. And so I'm wondering why you chose to make these changes and change the title of the poem.
I felt, the title of the poem, I felt that it wasn't appropriate over time, because the poem was not in exchange for my absence. That's what it was titled before, right? It was more about also me reckoning with my relationship with him, and his own isolation from us through his alcoholism and by his own choice of like, oftentimes, even when I was a child, him being on drinking binges when we went to visit, and he wasn't even at the house. He was like at a mistress's house where they made alcohol together. And that is actually where he was when my grandma died. He wasn't at the house. He had been on one of his binges. So I think that the new title was more appropriate in terms of really encapsulating the loneliness and his own isolation, but the way that addiction can be a form of isolation, right? As addiction is a way to retreat from society, from yourself, from your own feelings. And then the ending, I didn't like it. Even though it was a small change, it was just such a small change to that poem. Whenever I read it out loud to myself, it just didn't feel right. And so I kept like trying to rework it. And that is what I settled with, this ending. But I'm a poet who reads all of the poems out loud hundreds of times to myself as I'm editing them. And so that rhythm has to be like exactly in the right place for me. And so that poem, it just wasn't there. I didn't like the rhythm of the ending. And so I just kept reworking it until I had some peace with it.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that about, your craft, your journey, all of that. I wish we had another half hour because I have plenty more questions to ask. I'm really, really grateful that we get to share your art and your experience and your, everything else that you share with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for taking the time with these poems and holding them in your hands. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Beautiful works. Our second interview is with author Rudy Ruiz, and he's an award-winning author. His novel, The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, received 2 gold medals at the 2021 International Latino Book Awards. It was also a finalist for the Western Writers of America Silver Spur Award for Best Contemporary Novel. His short story collection, 7 for the Revolution, captured 4 International Latino Book Awards, including the Mariposa Prize for the Best First Book. I remember that book, Rudy. In 2017, he garnered the Gulf Coast Prize in Fiction. And just recently, he has been named a recipient of the Texas Institute of Letters 2023 Literary Award. A bilingual native of the U.S.-Mexico border, he earned his bachelor's and master's degrees at Harvard and now resides in San Antonio with his wife and children. Interviewing Rudy is Dr. Rachel Barrera, who was born and reared in the Rio Grande Valley. She's a recent Comadre member, a collector of anything Jaguar, and an avid reader since the 5th grade when she participated in the Pizza Hut Book It reading program that gave you the free pizzas for reading books. Comadre Rachel, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, everyone. Bienvenidos todos y todas a esta noche. Rudy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am very excited to be talking about Valley of Shadows. It's a beautiful cover. And it took me a little bit to realize this was a beautiful mariachi hat. So, and then a lot of the symbols that are in the book are in there as well. So let's start right off. Can you give us maybe a short synopsis of the novel?
Yes, and let me say thank you to all of you for having me here tonight, and especially to my comadre Nora, who's been just a long time supporter of my journey as a writer, and what you guys have done at Las Comadres with the book club is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. You know, all of us writers need this support, so thank you. And Rachel, it's great to see you again. We met at the Texas Book Festival, and I'm so excited to have somebody that knows the border, grew up on the border, born and raised, you know, talk to me about Valley of Shadows. So Valley of Shadows is a book set in the late 1800s along the border, starting in a mythical town of La Frontera, which is basically where our protagonist, Solitario Cisneros, is born and raised. And La Frontera is basically a town that I sort of concocted in my last novel, The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, as kind of a stand-in for Brownsville, Matamoros, but also sort of trying to generalize it and be like an iconic border town or twin border towns, which we have, of course, all along the border, as we all know. And in the story of Valley of Shadows, Solitario Cisneros is born basically in the Rio Grande at the time when the Rio Grande has been declared the new border between you know, Mexico and the United States, and his family's land is basically torn apart. His family, he loses his family in the process violently. And a curse or a maldición, he believes, is cast upon his family, including himself. And he flees La Frontera as a young man to try to run away from that maldición. And later in his life, he ends up in another border town in West Texas, in Chihuahua, a place called Olvido, again, a mythical border town, a remote, outpost in the desert. And there he has been trying to flee the curse, but the curse has caught up with him. And when the novel opens up, he's really lost everything yet again in his life. He's lost his wife, the love of his life. He's lost his country because of a shift in the course of the Rio Grande. And he's lost his job, which was as the lawman of Olvido, when Olvido was a Mexican town. And Olvido has become stranded on the US side of the border, along with its villagers. And Solidario has been stripped of his badge. So in this terrible situation, the novel opens up with a series of mysterious, horrific crimes that lead the Anglo townspeople, the Anglo leaders of the town, to bring Solitario out of mothballs, so to speak, to try to stop these crimes and bring the perpetrators to justice, because he's really the only option they've got at the moment. And so we follow Solitario and a group of his friends and allies as he tries to restore peace to the town and keep the town from further self-destructing.
Great, thank you for that synopsis. So I want to talk about the symbolism in this novel, because there is so much of it just in the name. So Solitario, who has a horse named Oscuridad, Águila Brava, the town of Olvido. Can you talk a bit more about how you develop that symbolism and the characters and the places in the novel?
Absolutely. Well, I grew up, as you guys already heard, I mean, born and raised on the border. And, I was always surrounded by all these symbols and the iconography of our culture, from, of course, Charro days in Brownsville, which really celebrates the bicultural, nature of our community there, to the music, to the spirituality, not only the Catholicism, but the indigenous spirituality and the curanderismo and the melding of the cultures. To me, all of that, all those ingredients always sort of find their way into my writing. And with Valley of Shadows, I really tried to kind of bring a lot of those, together in a setting which is historical fiction at the same time, and I really enjoyed doing research, because I wanted to not only make the story about the Mexican, residents of the border, but I wanted to also do the best that I could to be respectful of the Apache people that were being displaced, in the region at the time. And also the Anglo settlers. I didn't want to play it black and white and be like purely, judgmental or whatnot. So, I mean, there's what you find in the book is there's this line that Solitario says at one point that says racism is or discrimination is evil, but evil does not discriminate. And kind of what I was trying to explore was that there are good and evil people of all cultures and of all backgrounds. And when the good people can find each other and find ways to bridge their cultural divides and collaborate, then good things can happen and communities can be made better. And so, there's a lot of themes in the book that, although it's set in the 1880s, are themes that are just very, very palpable today, that we're still dealing with today over 100 and almost 150 years later. And so I think that's what makes the story still relevant today, trying to keep culture alive, but also trying to re-examine that culture and keep it moving forward.
Sure. And also you mentioned, historical fiction, but, it's also magical realism. And there's also rituals involved, history involved. How did you go about doing that research and making sure that it was represented in a way that you intended in the book to support the story?
I was very interested in writing this story. Was sort of like my first foray. I mean, all my writing is literary fiction, but this was really my first foray into historical fiction set this far back in time, and also my first foray into writing horror and kind of mystery / suspense. And I wanted to sort of create the structure or scaffolding of this mystery around Aztec rituals. And so I really enjoyed doing the research about Aztec and other indigenous beliefs and traditions around, in this particular case, the Aztec calendar. But to me, it was very fascinating. You know, I mean, I grew up around a very in a community and in a family where, I mean, I was not a stranger to like curanderismo, and I was exposed to, you know, a certain amount of it growing up, but it was fascinating to delve into some of the history and read more about, you know, just some of the specific practices. And again, going farther back into this Aztec mythology. I never experienced any of that, you know, fortunately, but it was fascinating for me to learn, you know, because as anyone who has studied the culture, you know, obviously it had many beautiful aspects to it that we can all be proud of if we come from Mexico, or our ancestors did. But it was also a very violent culture, and when you look at a lot of their practices and rituals, now we would find them horrific, you know. So it was a fascinating process of discovery.
Right. And for those who don't know, curanderismo is the art and science of folk healing practices in the Latino community. Obviously, they've evolved since since ancient times, but that's what you're talking about, curanderismo, because there's curanderas and there's brujas, there's priestess in this novel, and there's also a lot of magical realism. And one of the things that I looked at other interviews that you had, and one of the things that you talked about was, in a sense, in this novel, you kind of rewrote a little bit of history. There, you discovered this horrible tragedy that happened. And then I noticed in the book, once I discovered that you kind of rewrote this piece of horrible history and you rewrote it, I really was touched by that in this story, that group of young men live. So can you explain a little bit about the background of that and how you rewrote it in the book?
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up, and I'm so glad that, you know, you found that, you know, moving. I mean, I think one of the things as a writer that I aspire to is to try to imagine a better world. And if you write about it, that and find the hope and find the goodness in people, that if you can kind of tell those stories over and over again, that somehow they're going to make a positive difference, you know, in the world. And for me, that was what you're referring to. You know, a few years ago, I learned about the Porvenir massacre of 1918, which, for anyone, you know, in the group here who's not familiar with that, was a tragic event that occurred in West Texas in a small border town called Porvenir, where a group of young Mexican and Mexican-American boys and men were accused without any evidence of stealing cattle from the Anglo settlers, and without any due diligence, without any real investigation, and again, without any evidence, those you know, young men were rounded up and executed. And their families were, you know, so terrified and in such fear that they basically just fled across the river to Mexico and just left their belongings and left everything behind. And it took over 100 years for the state of Texas to recognize and memorialize the victims of that massacre. And it took a lot of people, I think, including some of the descendants of some of the original, you know, people that died, it took a lot of time for them advocating to have that piece of history recognized by the state legislature. When I first learned about that was actually in a small exhibit at the Bob Bullock State History Museum in Austin, and they're like a footnote, really, but within the museum, but it was still eye-opening for me. And then when I went home and I read more about it, I was moved, similarly to how you described. And then when I was working on this book, I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if you'd had more people of color in positions of power and authority, in those days? Could they have protected, people like these young men and boys? Could they have brought justice to them? Could they have saved lives? And that's sort of what I reimagine Solitario Cisneros does when he's given the opportunity. As I mentioned, there's these terrible crimes happening in Olvido, and immediately a large group of Mexican and Apache boys and men are rounded up, the same number as were killed by the Texas Rangers during the Porvenir massacre, and they're about to be executed. And Solitario intervenes with some of his magical, talents to stop tragedy from happening.
I don't think we're giving too much away if we say that he played his guitar and the bad people fell asleep and the innocent young men were able to run away.
Yes, exactly. And as you mentioned, that's the, when you look at the cover and you see that mariachi hat, that charro hat, Solitario is a charro. He is a guitarist and a singer. And I wanted to kind of explore writing what I call a neo-Western. I wanted to sort of, when I grew up watching the old Western movies with my dad. He grew up in the 1950s and loved all the old John Wayne type Westerns, and in those Westerns, I always thought, well, the Mexican characters, Mexican American characters, and the, indigenous people, indigenous characters were all just like usually either villains or comical sidekicks. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool to sort of reframe it, reclaim it, let the Mexican American and Apache characters be the heroes, and then also find different ways than the classic OK Corral, shootout for solving some of these problems. So instead of violence, you'll see throughout the book that every time he can, Solitario looks for every which way he can solve a problem before he resorts to, the classic, use of weapons.
Yeah, great. And let's talk a little bit more about Solitario. Tell us a bit more about his curse and why he thinks he deserves to be alone forever.
Yeah, the curse is really symbolic too of kind of multi-generational trauma and how it's passed down in families, and how sometimes we experience certain feelings or tendencies that we don't fully understand, why we inherited perhaps those tendencies from our ancestors or our parents. And in the case of Solitario, the maldición has to do with, it kind of manifests differently in different individuals in the family. And in the resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, the maldición, who they're actually related, the maldición really rears its head in machismo, and it's an exploration of how machismo is so self-destructive, destroys families, destroys relationships, and it's about a man's journey to try to evolve beyond machismo. In the case of Solitario, it's a little similar, but it's a different brand of machismo. And in his case, it has to do with pride and arrogance and sort of this I guess placing too much emphasis on honor, and to the point that you allow it to cause harm to the people you love. And in his case, it happens to him as a young man out in La Frontera, where his arrogance and his ego lead him to endanger the life of the girl he is in love with, and she dies. And then it happens to him again later when he believes he's fled the curse, and in his arrogance, he thinks he's he's managed to overcome the curse, and then he risks and loses his wife and her life in the process. And so he's determined to not let it happen again. And I guess what's strangely sad and tragic about that is that instead of thinking he can master that, his solution is just to basically try to avoid any real relationship and opening his heart to other people.
And literally live alone, like not,
Exactly.
be around.
Literally live alone because he just doesn't trust himself to not cause more pain to people he loves.
So you mentioned the resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez. And so should we have read that book first, or what's the order of the books you recommend, or they just stand alone?
They're very much standalone. So it doesn't really matter. Valley of Shadows is a standalone prequel to Fulgencio. If you, whichever one you read first, if you enjoy it, the other one is going to be a great kind of continued immersion in that same sort of universe of the border, and with the magical realism and with this family history that it was interesting to listen to the previous speaker, Cynthia, about how she wove in her family experiences into her story. And some of these storylines that are explored in these novels are also drawn from my own family myths and legends and happenings, going way back to when Matamoros and Brownsville were originally founded, way back when in the 1700s.
And that was actually going to be my next question, because as a writer, you are inspired by the things around you, things that happen to you, and you have weaved such interesting characters and storylines that I was going to ask, how is some of that related or inspired by your own family, your own experiences?
Very much so, very much so. I think I'm always looking to draw inspiration out from them. I was very blessed as a young child growing up on the border, to have close family on both sides of the border, and to have amazing storytellers in my family. Both my father, who passed away a few years ago and was actually the inspiration for the character of Fulgencio Ramirez, as well as both my grandmothers, but especially my maternal grandmother was just a phenomenal storyteller. She lived to be 101. And I was blessed enough to be, one of her last grandchildren. So I got to spend a lot of time with her towards the later part of her life. And she just regaled me with these amazing stories. She was born in 1900 and, lived all the way to 2001. And so I heard her stories of growing up during the years of the Mexican Revolution. Just a lot of amazing stories. So I always have tried to remember those stories, and I really was good at, I guess I'll say one thing I was good at as a little kid was listening to them. And I'm so glad I listened to their stories, because they're still inspiring me today, and they keep me motivated. And
so that leads me to ask, what or who inspired Onawa's character? She's such she's just incredible character, very, as far as I'm concerned, just as important as Solitario. She has a lot to do with a lot of what happens in the novel. So who inspired Onawa's character, if there was an inspiration?
Well, Onawa is I'm so glad you brought her up, because you're right. If anything surprised me about the process of writing this novel, was that I started out and I knew I had Solitario as my protagonist, and I knew I had his sidekick, his ever loyal Sergeant Elias, in mind. And Onawa was just a character that really surprised me when I was writing the book, and when at some point I realized, hey, she's really the true hero of this story, because she's the one that constantly saves the day. She's constantly saving Solitario's life, at least twice she saves his life. And anytime he faces a problem he can't solve by himself, like, she's the first person he turns to, because he knows she's extremely gifted. And her gifts are different than his, and you know, she's just an amazing person. But he also knows that as a Apache, half Mexican young woman in this, you know, in this place out in West Texas, she is very much on the margins. She's persecuted, she's disrespected, and even though her father was a leader in his tribe, he's now old and frail and kind of you know, also been sort of alienated from both the Apache community and the local community. So there's a lot of that alienation going on. And as far as inspiration went, I mean, she's one of those characters that I must say, and you know, Comadre Nora knows that my whole career has been like a matter of a lot of teamwork with my wife, Heather. And Heather really inspired a lot of the elements of two characters in the book. One was Luz, which was Solitario's wife, and the other was Onawa. And there's just different little elements, you know, that of both characters that I drew inspiration from my wife for them. And, you know, I've been married for 20, this is going to be the 28th year. So, you know, I think my wife is basically like, my wife and my mom and my grandmother, they're like my biggest inspirations for a lot of the female characters, you know, that I write. Just different elements though, of their personality and their style.
Great, thank you for that. And last question, just really quick, what are you working on next and when can we expect it?
Good question. You know, a writer's never done writing, right? Well, I'm really excited this is the first time that I'll publicly get to say this, because just Friday of last week, I received my signed contract for my next novel, and it's called The Border Between Us. And this one is what I call a border Bildungsroman. It's a coming of age story set more in the 1980s, and it's very, very loosely based on my own growing up in Brownsville, Matamoros. And this one I decided to be more like, there's still a little bit like a touch of magical realism, because I just can't seem to get away with it or get away from it. But it is set in Brownsville and Matamoros, and so I wanted to try to be a little truer to the facts, if you will.
Wonderful. So thank you so much. I'm sure we will all look forward to that novel.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to that book, Rudy. And so our next interview is with Karen Valentin, who's an award-winning American writer who is proud of her Puerto Rican heritage. She is the author of several books for children, including What Did Abuela Say? And Block Party. She is also the author of a young adult novel, The Summer She Changed Her Name. Karen has also published several books for adults, including a memoir, The Mother God Made Me to Be, awarded Best Parenting Family Book in 2016 by the International Latino Book Awards. An avid traveler who speaks 3 languages, English, Spanish, and French. She taught English as a second language in France after earning a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from Fordham University. And interviewing Karen is Comadre Maria Ferrer, and Maria is the Executive Director of Las Comadres para las Américas. Comadre Maria, take it away.
Welcome, Karen. It's so nice to see you.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Yes, we're very excited. We want to hear all about your inspiration. How did you get inspired to write this beautiful book about that little Puerto Rican girl, which, by the way, I read the book 3 times and there is no name. You don't give her a name.
No. My other book I did give you know, for Block Party and for What Did Abuela Say? She had a name, but this little girl is just everybody. So we just wanted to leave it like that. But yeah, so this is my new book that just came out. It's called God Is Just Like Me. And it's about this little Puerto Rican girl who is Afro-Latina, like my children are. And I wanted to write a book and put out a book that really reflected the Afro-Latino child, and also just because I grew up in a church, in Christian church, and the Sunday school lessons and all those little things, little like Velcro sticky things, you know, like the felt boards, and you know, it was all very whitewashed, you know. And you know, as we all know, you know, the paintings of Jesus, and but not only that, you know, a lot of the videos that we'd watch with the children, you know, the children's songs, you know, it would be all white children, and you know, and I feel like it to an extent it's still that way. You know, there's not a lot of representation of brown boys and girls, you know, who are in that mix and saying, well, you know, I'm a child of God too. And so it was just important to me to write a book that identifies, you know, the little girl, and that she's identifying herself with the image of God. And so you know, and again, even when I was older and I was like teaching Sunday school at one point, it was, you know, very suburban, and, you know, like go out into the, you know, into the meadows, and, you know, and look for, you know, I don't know, an acorn or something like that, right? And I'm like, we're in the city, you know, where am I going to bring these kids? You know, I don't know, just it was something like that, and I just wanted it to be also an urban backdrop as well. So
Well,
yeah,
she's very much in the city,
she
you
is.
know, and you know, it's a children's books, and yes, it's supposed to be simple and easy to read, pero it's so joyful. And
It
it's, you know, she's discovering, you know, God. She's talking to him, you
Yeah.
know, and you know, oftentimes we put you know, there's like a barrier. You don't talk to God. You got to do all, you know, there are all these people in between you. But
Yeah.
she hasn't learned that lesson yet. You know,
No.
God is her friend, and she's talking to him. Look, God, today we're dancing like you dance. You know,
Right.
you're just like me. We're creating just like you create, you know, and that communication, that innocence, it just comes through so beautifully.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that was very important to me, first of all, was in the book, there's no mention. I talk about my own experience growing up in a Christian church, but I didn't want to isolate other belief systems. So, you know, it specifies God, but that's it. There's no mention of like church or synagogue or you know, Jesus, you know, crosses, you know, anything like that. I wanted it to be something that every child could, because every child, you know, if you're raising your children, you know, with to believe in God, right? I want every child that's growing up in a household where they're being taught with that faith-based childhood, to know that they are also in God's image. It's not just the Christian. It's not just the you know, the Jewish child. It's not just the, you know, the Muslim child. And so but I have also been going through my own kind of I guess struggle with my own faith, and this kind of had a reflection in my book. So basically, I'm going back to simpler things. You know, I was raised in a very legalistic, you know, don't do this and don't do that, and you can't do this and you can't do that church. And, you know, right. And especially after the last, you know, couple of years, you know, Christianity is really, in my mind, leaves a sour taste in my mouth. You know, just some of the things that people who express themselves as Christians should never say or you know, express, in a lot of, you know, racist tones. And so I I wanted to get back to the simplicity of it. You know, I'm getting back to the simplicity of my own faith and trying to take away, like you say, those barriers and have a relationship with him and not the Christian culture. Because at this point in my walk, I need to differentiate the two. And so this is actually a very personal book for me as well, because you know, she captures that, you know, this little girl captures it so wonderfully in, you know, the way that she sees God, you know, and it's very simple. And, you know, like in the beginning, it says, God, I know you're all powerful, all knowing, lots of other really big words, you know. But sometimes I think you're just like me. And that's what she does. She, you know, like, on a drive with abuelos, she sees, you know, that God likes to make things, you know, so she says, just like me. And so that's the refrain for every page. You know, she, on Monday, she sees a big thunderstorm and she assumes, hey, God likes to make noise, just like me. And so, you know, colors, you know, God paints just like her. God likes music just like her. God likes to be quiet sometimes, you know, just like me. And so, you know, so I'm just hoping, you know, kids like, you know, my children and other children will, you know, just this will be kind of a base to say, you know, you're going to be learning maybe in your upbringing a lot of theology and maybe a lot of rules, a lot of things, a lot of big words, but to remember that at the base of all of it is that we were made in God's image and that, you know, he loves us and that, you know, we are just like him. So that's
very nice. Well, it's a very beautiful book. Now, we know that you've written 3 other books and stuff. So what attracts you to writing such young characters?
Right. So I've written two other children's books, including and this is my third. And then the other one was a young adult book. But and then the others are for adults. But I work with children. I love children. I really feel connected to them. Right now, what I do as a consistent income for myself at this point is I do music play groups for toddlers and babies. And there is just this joy and this energy that I just really love and appreciate, you know, and I just think it's magical. I just think the childhood is magical. And so I just really relate to it and appreciate that time in the life. And I wish adults could get back a little bit of that magic, you know.
What do your boys think of the book?
Oh yeah, they love it. They were so happy when it, you know, came in and they were just like, congratulations, mommy, you know, but
yeah, because they're not babies anymore.
They're not. Yeah, no, my kids are 13 and 15. So, you know, but yeah, we read it together. You know, wanted to show them, you know, when it came out. They hadn't read it before. So, but they, you know, yeah, they really enjoyed it. And they liked how it was like, you know, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you know, just like bringing the little girl through the whole week. And they, of course, loved that. I made her, you know, Afro-Latino like them. And, you know, it didn't make it her boy, but, you know, like presentation. So I wanted a little girl. Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. So tell us about Karen Valentin, the person. You know, we know you're a mother. We know you're an author, a baker, and stuff. So tell us more about yourself.
I mean, I'm an artist at heart, you know, so, you know, people say, oh, you do so many things, but the base of it is art. You know, I'm an artist and that's just such a part of who I am. And, you know, I'm a painter. The baking came with, it's more of a like sugar arts. You know, I use sugar cookies and royal icing as a means to create art. And so I'm not really a baker. I mean, I bake, but that's just a means for, it's just another medium for the art that I want to create. I love to write, of course, just anything to express feelings. I write music, and so yeah, I'm an artist. That's at the forefront. But I'm a mother. I raising my kids has been just the most important thing that I've done. They're the best part of who I am. And so that's been an amazing journey. And then the creativity, as I was saying before, a lot of that also comes from I have ADHD. So actually my next book is we're in the process of finishing up the editing, and then we're going to start shopping for a publisher. But it's hopefully when it comes out, it's going to be called Wired Together. So I have ADHD, and my children also have ADHD, and so there are challenges, of course, but it's also this really beautiful thing, the way our brains are wired, and the way that we express ourselves, and the way that we see solutions that no one else is even thinking about. And so we forget a lot, and we zone out a lot, and there's a lot of challenges. But this book, I wanted to express the victories as well, not just the struggles, but the victories. So
is it a young adult or an adult book?
An adult book. It's a memoir. So it's a memoir where I am speaking about my childhood. So it'll be like five very small chapters, and small because ADHD, attention span. So I wanted this to be a very ADHD friendly book about ADHD. So very short chapters about growing up with ADHD. So I start, very young, and just being in church, and having this wanting to get up and jump around, but I had to sit down and be quiet, and so I do, 5 of those, and then I'll do a handful of ones as a mother raising my children and dealing with their ADHD, which, in the beginning of the book is not even diagnosed yet. And so there are a lot of similarities. There are lots of differences, but honestly, in the 1980s, not much was known about ADHD. And I would say that there's still a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of struggle. You have to really advocate for your child if your child has ADHD, or they will be lost and feel like they're stupid, because that's really how you feel. Like I grew up feeling I was stupid, and my mother, in her frustration, confirmed that, and she would always call me stupid, but just in her frustration. And so I want to shed light and I want to give hope and understanding to those with ADHD that you're not stupid. You're made to think in this certain way that your brain just doesn't do. And your brain does things a lot faster and a lot bigger sometimes. And because you're kind of put in this box, you're made to feel stupid. So the goal in the book is to just give children with ADHD that confidence that they need, understanding that the more you learn about your brain, the more you can work with it instead of it, working against it. And also educating families so that they understand that, look, your child isn't being lazy. Right now, your child's brain has these moments of where you have to do everything. And there are other moments where you don't want to do anything at all. And so we have that power to really hyper focus in on something for the things that we really enjoy and things that really interest us. And for the things that don't, our brain just doesn't naturally give us that dopamine. So we have to find it in different ways on the outside. in order to motivate
But I
us.
think this can also be, I think you may need a chapter in there for educators. You need to educate them because sometimes unless the school is like proactive and is looking to do something like that, most teachers, you know, they don't have time, they don't know how, and they'll get frustrated.
So my storyline moves a certain way, and then my son, especially my oldest son, both of them have ADHD, but his story in particular is the arc of their journey, and it really does touch on the educators because I had a very hard time with him in schools. In public school, he was lost. I ended up taking him to private school, spent a lot of money that I didn't have, even though they gave me a scholarship. It was struggle for a single mom. Even they couldn't help him. And I thought, well, then if they can't help him, who can? Because, you know, there was like 10 kids in the class until I put in an application for a progressive public school. And it was on the east side, so we weren't zoned for it, but they let us in. They had a seat and they let us in. And when I tell you that the teachers there, especially the teacher that had him, changed the trajectory of our entire life. My son went from always being told he needs to probably repeat the grade to being the top of his class. He never repeated. He graduated at the top of his class, and now he is in a marine biology program on Governor's Island and doing extraordinarily well. And it's just amazing. And so there's a quote that I use, you know, I don't have it in front of me and I hope I don't mess it up, but when the flower doesn't bloom, you don't change the flower, you change the environment that it's in. And so that's what I had to do with my son, is advocate for him and change the environment so that he would thrive, and he has. And if I left it alone, he would still think that he was stupid. Like, you know,
that is not the case.
Not the case.
Nope,
He's
nope.
brilliant. He's brilliant. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're not just saying that because you're his mother.
And no. I mean, I may be a little biased, but you know, he really is something else. I mean, other people tell me as well, like, you know, he's a special kid. So I'm proud of him.
We're proud of all of you. We're proud of all of you. And, you know, thank you for being here. Please let us know when this book comes out. We want to, you know, read it. We want to help you promote it and everything.
So the important thing is, so I'm going to hold this book up here.
Absolutely.
I've written several books, but none of them have sold particularly, you know, well. I mean, they sell okay, but not very well. And so this to me is I was almost worried that I wouldn't get a contract for this book, because I thought, well, you know, the publisher's going to see that my sales for the other books aren't as great, but they gave me this contract and I was so grateful. And so I'm really trying to get this book out there and show future publishers that my books can sell. So you know, we're starting with this one, but I'm really, my heart is in this book called Wired Together, and hopefully we'll find a publisher that believes in me. So yeah,
our fingers are crossed for you.
Me too.
All right, my love. Good luck, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I appreciate you all.
Take care. Nora?
I'm gonna do the closing, Maria. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Hang on.
Our thanks, can I begin?
Yes.
Okay. Our thanks to authors Cynthia Guardado, Rudy Ruiz, and Karen Valentin, and their publishers, the University of Arizona Press, Blackstone Publishing, and Beaming Books, for their generous donation of books to our early registrants. Thank you as well to our interviewers, Comadres Nilda, Rachel, and Maria. We thank our audience for taking the time to join us tonight, and to those that submitted questions. And we'd like to thank all our volunteers without whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Mil gracias. Please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes and Nobles, etc. Those reviews carry weight with the publishers as well as the readers. Buy books to support our authors, and if your library does not have a book you want to read, ask them to order it. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Remember, our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos. All are welcome. Our May books are The House in the Pines by Ana Reyes, Chingona, Owning Your Inner Badass for Healing and Justice by Dr. Alma Zagarotha Petty, and You Are Beautiful by Dora Maria Abreu. Again, thank you all for your continued support of our book club and Latino literature. Please join us in celebrating Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club throughout the year by buying books and supporting Latino authors. Good night, and always read Latino Lit.
See you Saturday, Worldwide
you.
Comadrazo, 1 p.m. Central Time.
Yes, don't forget Saturday.
Check your mail. Link registering is there.